Good afternoon and welcome to the Pivot Series organized by the Northern Virginia Economic Development Alliance, NOVA EDA. I'm John Jacobs, your host for the series and for this session today. Really great having you here. We have an incredible panel gathered, so I'll go and introduce them in a moment. This series is designed to support professionals, especially those impacted by the federal workforce changes and government restructuring. And this includes, obviously, federal employees, government contractors, nonprofit professionals, anyone really who is navigating a transition and asking what's next. Today's session is called How to Own Your Story in a New Industry. And it's all about helping you tell your story with clarity, confidence, and purpose. Whether you're applying for new jobs, stepping into unfamiliar terrain or territories or sectors, or simply trying to reconnect with what makes you unique, your story matters. Your story is important, and we'll get into that. We're going to have a live poll that I'm going to activate in just a sec. It's 4 simple questions, very easy, very tight questions, and I encourage you to just answer those questions so that we can actually use your responses. We'll share them with everybody and use them as part of our discussion. So let me just do that now. And you should now see a poll. I don't know if panelists, you might see the poll. And if you do, great, groovy. Speaking of panelists, let me make some introductions here. Joseph Liu is a career strategist and host of the Career Relaunch podcast. Joseph helps professionals gain the clarity, confidence to successfully relaunch their careers and craft compelling narratives that connect. Kathleen Duffy is Senior Director of Career Development at George Washington University School of Business. Kathleen works closely with mid-career professionals and graduate students to reposition themselves to new industries. And Dr. Paula Caligiuri is the co-founder and CEO of Skillify, a digital learning platform helping individuals build career adaptability and skills. Paula is also a distinguished professor at international business at Northeastern University. And thank you all 3 for being with us today. So I'm going to jump into questions here. And these are, the first question is sort of just a baseline question that I'll aim, I think, ask Joseph to respond first, and then Kathleen and Paula as well. When we say own your story, Joseph, what does that mean? And why is it so important for someone in the midst of a career transition to own their story?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important just to remember that proactively taking control of your narrative and doing your best to shape how people perceive you is a really critical part of career management in general, but it's especially important when people are making transitions. Oftentimes when people are making transitions, they can feel quite vulnerable, whether they're from a non-traditional career path or if they're entering a new field, they might be feeling some imposter syndrome. They might be uncertain if their past experiences are relevant. And oftentimes people are also very afraid of how others are going to perceive them if they've just been laid off or if there's a gap in employment. So if you're not careful as a candidate, you can sometimes come across as defensive or unsure of yourself or even unqualified, not because you are unqualified, but because you actually think you're unqualified, and that comes through. So the first person you actually have to convince of your career story is yourself. And once you get clear on your narrative, you can then confidently sell that story to others. But it's important to convince yourself first and to be on the front foot and define your narrative so others don't just do it for you.
Great. Paula, Kathleen, any add on there?
Paula, did you have anything to add on?
Actually, yeah, I love the way we're using the phrase story, because it puts us in the role of an editor, of a narrator. We can leave some things on the cutting room floor. We don't need to over-explain. Joseph, to your point, we don't need to apologize. You don't need to necessarily, cringe from the maybe a gap in your resume or a shift in your roles. You can just own it, and it's your narrative, and you can say it with purpose. So I really love the idea that we're calling this our story. Really love that.
I love that too. And just to add on to what you're saying there about that, I think, this is your opportunity to truly differentiate yourself. One of the things that I hear a lot from the students that I meet with is, how do I differentiate myself? Well, it's your story. And so when you can tell your story in a very authentic way, fearlessly, and eventually that fearlessness happens. And I always say to people, yes, everyone feels nervous when they start telling a stranger their story, or someone they don't know their story, because to Joseph's point there, you're afraid of, what are people going to think about what I'm saying? Maybe, you're doing your own self-critical messages internally, and you get to empower yourself. So it's got to come from within, feel really comfortable with it, and then work with other people to practice your story that you trust before you get out there and go live with it. That helps too.
That's great. Just one housekeeping item. The chat is open, folks. So your community, and this is the third episode, but the fourth issue. So I recognize, some of the back and forth conversations. Please go ahead. If you have questions, there's a Q&A box as well, but we're very skilled. If you can aim for the Q&A box, great. If it's in the chat, we'll pick it up as well. And I encourage you to interact with this awesome panel. So please do. Next question I'm going to throw first to Paula, if I may. Talking about professional stories and compelling stories, what makes a professional story compelling, especially when you're pivoting into something unfamiliar? And could you include in your answer the idea of a story arc?
Sure. I think, stories make us relatable humans, right? Stories have a plot. Stories have interesting characters, and stories have an arc. And I love the fact that we get to create this ourselves. Stories can't live based just on the context. So it's not because you worked in X location or with X agency. It's because of the skills you've gained along the way, or the experiences that you've had, or those crucible moments that changed you and shaped you and gave you greater purpose. And that's all yours to narrate. So I agree. I think it is your story, it's your plot, you're the character, and you get to create the arc.
Kathleen, this next question I have you in mind, given your career development work at GW. And before I ask the question, I will relate to the audience a story. I had a recruiter call me once. I was looking for a role, and I was recommended for this position. And I had just left my other position, not under my own volition, just there was a restructuring, and I went, and that was it. And it was a short tenure, it was 10 months, and it was a bit of a shock for me. And so I get the screening call from the recruiter, and I was insecure. I felt guilty about having been fired. I kept almost apologizing in my explanation as to why I was unemployed or looking for a very senior job. And I felt really badly about that. Kathleen, I just set you up for a massive expectation of a response. So sorry about that. But no, so the question is, what are some of the most common mistakes, common missed opportunities we see when people frame their past experience, what they've gone through, and what their actual skill sets are?
Well, I'm so glad that you shared that experience with me before you asked that question, because that experience, John, is why I absolutely love what I do in my purposeful work as a career coach and supporting, especially when I worked with Lee Hecht Harrison before I came to GW School of Business. I would work with the executives just like you, or with anyone in mid-transition. And the common mistakes that I would see that they would make, and I always thought, oh, if I could only have gotten to them before they went out there and crashed out there. But it's okay to go out there and make mistakes too, right? It's not the mistakes, but what you do with them that really matters. I would say there's 4 quick things I'd like to cover on that point, and I'll make it quick. One is, ironically, rushing into it. Sometimes people will just accept a call from someone blindly and feel like they have to start talking and explaining things when they have not had an opportunity to really do some self-reflection, some self-care, get out, meditate, exercise, do whatever you need to get yourself in a mindset that puts you in a place of more empowerment And what you miss out on when you rush into it too fast without preparing is you miss out on the opportunity to come across with that initial impact. Someone who's confident, someone who's resilient, and someone who's going to kind of move forward and bring in some great things into this opportunity. The second big mistake I see is people sounding too critical or speaking negatively about their employers or former employers. No matter what happened, no matter how awful the story was, you may have every reason to feel that way. Express those emotions outside of interviews or in professional ways. Like, use your networks, your coaches, your counselors, your family and friends to get all those emotions out. But when you're prime time, you've got to sound very polished and professional about that employer. What you miss in that opportunity is that when you're interviewing, people are very inspired when they hear that you had a terrible, a very tough experience, but you stepped up and you made something out of it, right? So that's the opportunity you miss when you do that. The third thing is underestimating your transferable skills or apologizing for skills you don't have, which is something you mentioned, John. And what you miss out there is you miss an opportunity by showcasing your transferable skills, because you may not have the specific list of skills that this job is requiring, but I guarantee you there are ways you can talk about the skills you had that show transferable into this new role. And people look for the leadership qualities. They look for people they want to work with, that want to be continuous learners. So you can even give examples of that. And then the
Right.
fourth thing is getting too much into the details and into the weeds. If
Yes.
you do that, you lose your listener and they can't even remember who you are. So keep it simple and make a couple compelling points. So.
Great, Kathleen. Sorry, Paula, Joseph, anything you want to jump in there? It was a fairly encompassing answer, I thought. Well done, Kathleen.
Well done, Kathleen.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
I'll sort of,
colleague.
I'll aim at the academicians for a sec over here and ask this next question about tools and exercises to use to help people surface those skills and experiences. So I don't know if it's a soft skill that somebody wants to acquire or has, and they just don't reveal it. If somebody's an introvert and they just, they're not self-championing enough. I don't know, Paula, do you want your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because we always have to go back to your story is you, the character, and the plot, and that is sort of the narrative of your career journey. So if we go to you, the character, we want to be able to take inventory, like you just described, of what those great skills, abilities, capabilities that you have uniquely. And sometimes it's really hard for us to see it. So there's a bunch of exercises we could think of, but a few really good ones. One would be, think about the times when you're at your best at work. What are you sharing? What skills are you showing at that moment? Or what were the greatest challenges that you have overcome, or the moments of pride? Sort of what were you sharing? What were you exhibiting? What could others observe of you? When you start to lay those together, usually what you see is a pattern emerging. That's your character. That's who you are, and that's what you bring, and that's what you'll bring to the next opportunity. But it takes a little bit of work to do that, a little bit of introspection in order to understand your character. We think we understand ourselves, most of us don't.
Kathleen?
I love what you just said, Paula. I think that you were spot on there. It's creating that compelling plot and the story that people are going to be really intrigued and listening to. But it comes from within, and by doing all that reflection, it does take a lot of work sometimes. You have to be patient, right, with the process of that. And journaling is another thing I love to tell people to do. I think journaling can be very enlightening for people when they're going through a scary time or having just been laid off from a job or not certain about the future. I encourage some of my clients and students to spend 10 or 15 minutes, just even imagine journaling with handwriting. It's actually good for your brain, right? And you can do some reflection. I usually structure some in exercises for them, just a few questions to throw out, similar, Paula, to what you were just saying. What do you like to do? What do I not like to do? People very often go after things they don't like, even if they're on their resume. And I say, why would you put that on your resume if you didn't like it and don't want to do it again? So try to come up with things you like to do, and then where are your priorities? Be creative, do some dreaming about what you might like to do, who you want to be with, what's your environment going to look like. And then the other second piece is the tools. The career leader assessment, for people who feel comfortable using assessments like the MBTI or the career leader assessment we use with business students. Unfortunately, those tend to be pricey. If you do a retail version of a career leader, it's like $100, but I did get a $20 discount for anyone that's involved in the Pivot series. So I'll send that information to you later, John. Career leader, it correlates your interests, your skills, and what motivates you into best career path matches. So if you're really at a loss and you kind of have that writer's block, the assessment is you take it yourself, you get the report in your own email. You don't need a psychologist or counselor to debrief that one with you. And it'll give you some good language to help you get jump started if you're stuck.
That's great, Kathleen. And feel free, Kathleen, to put that in the chat as well, if it's convenient. If not, I will socialize it with everyone.
Yeah.
Kathleen, have you ever used Career One Stop that through the U.S. government? Because that's free. It's
That's great. I haven't used that one.
Based on the ONET database.
Okay.
I would have to look it up and send it to you, John, so you could share it with the.
Well, that's even better.
Community.
Yeah, that's a great.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And to the audience, I will say we're a little behind on loading content on the landing page of the Pivot, and we're going to solve that. I'm on that. Apologies for that, but we will get that resolved the next day or 2 business days at the most. So yes, Paul, that would be great if you could share that with me. I closed the polls. I'm sharing the poll. So before my next question, maybe we can just take a little look together at the poll results. First question, which describes your current professional situation? And of course, it's a spread, but the number one answer was recently laid off from a federal role. Sorry to hear that. The proactively exploring a government contractor recently ended. High correlation there is number 2 answer. And you all can see it, I assume, as well. Number 2 question, what's the biggest challenge you face when telling your story? Heavily weighted on, and this is multi-choice, translating my experience to something relevant and not sure which direction I'm headed in just yet. Number 3, just quickly reading here. What direction are you currently exploring for your next chapter? So, and the number 1 response to that is a job in a new industry or different role. 55% of respondents on that. And again, a bit spread. And the last question was, what's the most important outcome you want from this session today? Number 1 answer on that is how to confidently communicate my value in a new industry. Panelists, any quick observations here? Any surprises?
Well, it seems like one thing that jumps out to me is that nobody said they have a secure job or contract in place. And so there's probably a lot of anxiety, just like job security in general or job stability.
Thank you for that, Joseph. I'm going to get to the next question, but I kind of want to hit this first one. So recently laid off, either from federal role or government role. If they put those together, it's a big grouping of folks, hence why we're here. So I think maybe we can later on in the session talk about either, Joseph, you have examples of successful pivots in your podcast, and I would encourage you, if you could drop that into the chat at some point. Okay. And then I think hearing those success stories is very encouraging and helps reinforce us as to where we are. Next question I'm going to throw at Joseph first, if I can.
Okay.
So as you type, I'll ask question. How can someone confidently explain a gap or detour or even a career failure in a way that builds credibility? What I didn't do in my experience with a recruiter, I try to run away from the fact that I lost my job. And that was the wrong move. Joseph.
Yep. Okay, yeah. So by the way, sorry, the sun is coming. It's late here in London. The sun's coming right into my eyes right now. So if you see little spotlights on me, that is me not being, anyway, I'm trying to kind of dodge around it a little bit. But
no worries.
Yeah, John, I'm really glad that you shared that anecdote earlier, because that's a really great example of a very typical situation where somebody has gone through an unexpected layoff or their move has been forced upon them. It's not that they've proactively chosen to make a change. And so the very first suggestion I would have to you, if you're in one of the many people here who have been recently laid off, or maybe your contract's been abruptly ended, is as you're trying to then pitch yourself to your next employer, prospective manager, I would avoid the natural tendency of being overly apologetic, and I wouldn't dwell too much. Most of the time, we are probably more critical of these detours than others. And so how you handle the gaps and transitions may be a bit different versus kind of just being laid off. And so you have to think a little bit about, is this my proactive choice or is this something that's happened to me? But regardless, I would keep it quite simple. I would keep it very factual and literally use a 1 or 2 sentence explanation as to what happened. You can explain what happened, here's what you learned, and what you did next. If it is a gap or a transition that you have chosen to make, then I would just keep it simple. I would say, I wanted to do this, so I'll just give you a concrete example from my own career. Is when I left the Bay Area in San Francisco, I was working for a well-known company there, the Clorox company, and I left before I got promoted when I was working in marketing. When I moved to the UK, which is where I'm now based, I was very self-conscious of that. Now, I kind of assumed that people would think that I left the company because I couldn't get promoted, and that was always in my head. It literally never came up a single time during the interview. So I had to really battle myself and avoid the natural inclination to over-defend, to over-explain. And instead, what I think can be very useful is to just give a recap of what happened, talk about what you learned, and just reiterate your enthusiasm for what's next for you. So to kind of really focus on looking ahead.
Excellent. Paula, Kathleen, thoughts, additions?
I love what you just said, Joseph. I think it's so powerful because I think for all the emotions of what people go through when they lose jobs or have the uncertainty, there's a lot of stories going on in people's minds about what they think others might be thinking of them. And I have a lot of compassion for people that go through that because, they've been through a really hard time, and most people really want to be supportive. They're good people. Most of the people you're interviewing with and you're networking with, they're going to open that door and say, come on in, let's have a cup of coffee and talk. What's unique about this situation, which brought all of us together here today for this particular session and this wonderful pivot series you're doing, John, is that everyone knows these government layoffs are happening. It is one of the most broadly communicated, marketed layoff situations I've ever seen in all my years of working with people. So there's going to automatically be people who are very energized and want to support anyone who's in this situation right now. So definitely, don't hesitate to ask people. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Next question I have written here is about reframing nonlinear career paths, which sounds like an engineering point. But didn't intend that to be the case. But Paula, maybe I'll ask you to respond to this. So we have government employees, federal employees, and government contractors, and maybe they're looking at making a hard right or hard left turn, and therefore maybe they would be perceived as nonlinear. How do you tie that knot? How do you help reframe the experience so that is it completely to a different field?
So your purpose ties the knot, having a purpose, and that's your narrative. So individuals who are going through any kind of a pivot, all they really need to do is own it. Don't over-explain it, as Kathleen and Joseph shared. You don't have to apologize for it. You're just contextualizing it, that you're really excited about, you realize that you're doing a values reset and that your value was maybe your creation of community, or maybe it was your service to a greater good, or whatever that might be, and that you're excited to bring that forward. You realize something, you're doing a values reset, and now you're moving that forward. So I really love it because kind of like nobody can question it. It's yours to own. It's your It's yours to share authentically. Just want to underscore, because I think it ties to the last question as well. If one good thing came out of COVID, it's the emphasis on authenticity. So anything shared, just to basically explain it authentically, that's it. That's all you really need. People are really, is Kathleen and just, people are good. People are, we're out there together. This is not easy. And people are usually pretty understanding, but purpose, bottom line there is really share your purpose and share it well.
Mhm.
Thanks for that. Joseph, we talked, you have your Career Relaunch podcast, which again, to the audience, I encourage you to watch. They're excellent. And we talk about guiding people through the discomfort of rewriting their story mid-career. Let's assume that it was a forced separation, right? They didn't want to leave their position, didn't expect it to come down like that. What is the discomfort? Is it I identified so much with my job and now I don't know who I am? What is that?
It is a lot of emotion. So when I think about the barriers that come up that stand in the way of people getting from where they are right now to where they want to go, they tend to fall into two categories. So you've got the practical barriers or the practical concerns that people have around how am I going to be able to, and I think people express this in the poll, take my past experiences and make them relevant or valuable to my future employer. How am I going to reshape my resume? How am I going to craft my cover letter? Am I going to be able to make it through to the interview? Because maybe you're somebody who feels like you do better face to face with somebody. So there's all these practical job application barriers. What can oftentimes be more disruptive, and this is what I tend to hear from the guests that come onto the show, are the emotional barriers. So as you mentioned, John, maybe there's a bit of a pride around what I used to have. So maybe you're somebody who's come out of, I don't know, fancy office, really nice job title, work for a great organization that's very reputable, and then you've been laid off, and now you're just you. And so divorcing yourself and divorcing your identity from your professional identity can be quite difficult. There are emotional aspects around embarrassment. So people oftentimes when they're not employed, they feel like they should be employed, and they feel like other people think they should be employed. So there's that. There's a lot of stress that can come up around finances, around trying to quickly land your next job, the stress around just making time to job hunt, the stress of wondering how long this gap is going to be. And I think there's also just a fear that they won't figure it out. So what's really important during those periods of discomfort is to really take the time to reground yourself. And I know it's kind of tough, but to really script out how do you want to frame up your past, present, and future, and to really take the time to literally script out how am I going to describe my professional trajectory? How am I going to summarize my personal history? And to kind of take a top-down rather than a bottom-up approach to your career story. And what I mean by that is to decide on the chapters of your career. Make it clear how you see the evolution of your career. Make it clear what you're seeking next. And I would err on the side of specificity, just because that generally connotes confidence. And I know you might not know exactly what you want to do next, but to try to convey that you have a strong idea of what that is can be very compelling to your future employer.
Joseph, I'm curious, from the folks that you're talking to, is there a comfort with activating one's network, or do you think that sometimes people hold back because they're shy or embarrassed or frustrated about where they are in their job search?
Great question, Paul. So I've seen both. So I've seen people who really embrace the idea of networking, and I'm a big proponent of networking and to tap into the relationships. They'll go on LinkedIn and they will actually post up, "Hey, I've been laid off. If you know of any opportunities, please let me know." They'll reach out to all their contacts. But then you've got the people who are much more in the kind of more, not necessarily embarrassment phase, but they don't want to like bother people, or they don't want other people to think that the only reason why they're reaching out is because now they need something from them. And so the way to kind of mitigate that, and what I've heard people say, is that if they can build a habit around keeping their network warm, then it kind of offsets that feeling of awkwardness when you do reach out to people. But yeah, people fall into two categories. I will say the people who are more comfortable tapping into their network tend to get further faster.
Oh,
So
definitely.
yeah.
I think that's such a great point, Joseph, and that was a great question, Paul. I'm glad you asked it because it opens up, the importance of people who are in one industry all the time. Their heads down, focused in their work in that particular sector. Particularly, federal government and government work is different than private sector, obviously, and nonprofits and associations. So it can feel really daunting for people when they think, well, I don't really know where to begin. I don't know anyone outside of my government. It's like trying to learn a whole new language, and I think we always say, the time to really, connect with network is by keeping it a warm network. But if you haven't, and there are many people that sit in my office with deer in the headlights and say, well, I don't even know what that means. I haven't been doing a good job of keeping a warm network. Now what do I do? So for those who have done it, great. But if you haven't, it's not too late. I always say it's never too late to start that. So today, in today's session, if you walk away with one thing, you get to start your warm network, and you've got a few people right here on this call that would be, I'm sure, happy to respond to your LinkedIn outreach and start a conversation. Yes.
Yeah, it's
Okay, Kathleen, sorry, we
No,
have to stay
please.
on this networking thing for just a second
Yes.
because so I've been teaching for 30 years. And so now some of my students who were, MBAs in the 30 years ago are now quite senior in their careers. When they're laid off and they reach out, it hasn't been a warm network. I haven't seen them in 20, 30 years, but I love getting notes from them because you're kind of reminding them, hey, I took your class. This is the influence it had on me. Whether they're lying or not doesn't matter. It just gives the person who they're reaching out to this warm fuzzy. But I will I shared this in the session number one. I'm going to share it again because it's so critical. When you reach out to anyone in the network, you might want to share kind of here's the job I'm looking for. Here's someone in your kind of circle of influence that I think you're connected to. Here's why I'm great for the job. And oh, by the way, my resume is attached. Because when you do all of those things, it makes it super easy for someone to say, oh, wow, there's someone from my past I really enjoyed. And now I get that nice helper's high because I can help that person out. So I'm all in on networking.
I love that. And the other piece of it too is that everybody that you connect with, to start to explore, if you have no idea what you want to do, but you want to move into a whole different industry, coffee chats are great, informational meetings are great. The idea is not to go out and ask someone for a job, right? When you just start the networking either. In some cases, yes, like Paula, your example is fantastic because you put it all together, you make it really easy for you to help that person if they've done all the work. And if you don't have all that together and you want to just, where do I start? Just reach out and have coffee with someone. Look at your friend network, your family network, your volunteer networks, your communities. There's lots of ways you can do that.
And also, if it doesn't end up transpiring in anything immediately, do not be discouraged or disheartened. Sometimes it can take months, sometimes years for some of these initial conversations to actually produce some sort of a concrete result. And you never know how long it's going to take. So that's why, as Kathleen and Paula mentioned, it's important to keep that network warm.
And also it seems, so trying to take away from these great contributions here, thanks for those. You're almost asking somebody to brainstorm with you, right? You're almost saying, because you don't know, you don't want necessarily to put the onus on them. And so hence the hesitancy, I think, to network. There's maybe a bit of embarrassment, a shame, being a bit ashamed, but then you don't want to necessarily feel like you're obligating somebody. Last week, Sunny Levitt from Corn Ferry had a very good observation. She had 4 questions. I don't remember the first 3, but I remember the last one. And the last one was I thought, pivotal one, where she said, the question is, who else do you think I should talk to? Which is the release question, right? So therefore, you're working, you're networking, you're valuing your network and the individual on the other side of the equation. You're re-engaging. People love that much more. To my fellow introverts, people love when you reach out to them. I do too. And when somebody pings me, and I'm not the most gregarious guy. So, but I think these are wonderful points. Next question, just to move along, and the audience I would say this, if you have questions, so two things. One, if you have questions, please go ahead and ask them, or things that you want to share with each other. Chat's open. Everybody can see the chat. I think what's been really good about this series thus far has been watching everybody sort of interact and support one another. Next question I'm going to throw to my second point was, are we hitting the mark? Is there something that you want us to discuss that we're not hitting on? Because we have about 25 minutes left and we have questions, of course, but I want to make sure we're hitting it. So don't be shy. Next question is authenticity versus strategy. So I'll throw this to Kathleen first, if I may.
I love this word. Yeah, I do. I love it.
We think about the fine line between being authentic and sounding too rehearsed, right? And though we have to practice, to Joseph's point, we have to know what we're about. How do we not make that stale? How do we make it authentic so that, it doesn't seem as if somebody just pushed the button and we spoke?
This is, again, a wonderful question. And, Paula, you had talked about the theme of authenticity weaving out through our entire conversation today, because as you tell your story and you craft your story, it's about being authentic. And Joseph, you also alluded to that in your story about the importance of really telling your story in a compelling and yet honest way, right? And being who you are and not feeling embarrassed of that, but yet also stating that people feel that way. So one professor really made an impression on me one day when I sat in his class, his very first class. He said to 100 students, and it's a finance class of all things, the one piece of advice I'm giving you all right now today, and I want you to remember this for the rest of your life, you have to know who you are. And you could have heard a pin drop, right? Now that's a very simple thing to say, but it's very deep. And so as you're going through this journey, authenticity wins every single time versus being rehearsed. When I work with people who are really in the beginning phases of learning how to tell their story and start networking, they really want to cling to the comfort zone of a script. Please let's write a script. I'm going to memorize the script. And that will help me ease some of my performance anxiety and worrying about what they're going to think. The problem is when someone memorizes a script and they talk to you, you know it. So we work with people and say, it's okay if you're comfortable writing a script, that's great, you can do that. But let's practice it enough so that that script starts to become so organic that you don't need the script anymore and you can speak from your heart and speak authentically. The other thing you can do is write a few bullet points, just a few key things that you want to bring across to people that you don't want to forget, because people get nervous too, which is so natural and so normal. And none of this is ever going to be perfect. It's okay for it to be a little messy, because when you're authentic, it's always going to shine through. So that's my thoughts about that. I'm sure Joseph or Paula might have other comments on that authenticity.
I think you covered it well.
Thank you, Joseph.
I would agree, Kathleen. And as you said, it's you. You're the main character. This is your sense of purpose. So you own the arc and the narrative. And I think what I see with my students is when they're trying too hard to tell the story almost verbatim, they get flustered when something's not quite right. You sort of stop believing that the story's real. Right. So really, it's okay. We don't know your story. You do. Tell it as you want it to be told. What I found helps a lot is telling it to lots of different people. Tell the story to a friend, tell the story to a spouse, tell the story to a recruiter or a coach or whatever. But you keep telling it to different people, and all of a sudden it starts to take on you get more comfortable having it have different shapes while the story is uniquely your own.
It's interesting. This telling the story and the structure of a story. I know maybe I'm beating a dead horse here, but here's what I did fairly recently. I wrote out my career path, looking over my shoulder, right? What the heck just happened for 30 years? And I wrote it out in fairly detailed way. And then I put it, because AI is a friend of mine, I put it into ChatGPT, and I kept challenging the chat, the prompts, and the chat rather, to help me, to tell me about me, almost like a reflection. Because again, it's not a person, it's a computer, it's just programming, but it helped me get out of my own mind a bit. And then I did exactly what you've discussed, is I've sat with my family, my wife, and, went through this and talked about it a bit. And she'd be like, how'd you get there from here, right? So I think rehearsing enough, and Joseph, your point was pivotal here as well, which is you're the first person to convince of your own story. That was a fantastic point. Speaking of storytelling, maybe I'll throw this to Kathleen first. Storytelling is not just about the past, but it's also about where you're headed, where you're going, and particularly in a career transition. How do you tell that story that points toward that new career path? So, like, that's hard to tell the story to go forward. What's the aspiration?
Absolutely. And it does take some work and some time. I know, Joseph, you mentioned earlier, this process is, you got to be patient because it takes time to start to be able to talk about that forward-facing story. And naturally, in the beginning phases, you're going to be really stuck in the past story because that's where you might be right now. And that's okay, because be where you are, right? What I encourage people to do is try to look at this as kind of exciting. This is an adventure. We've talked a lot about storytelling has a plot and a twist and a beginning, middle, and an end, right? So, your story is not over yet. You got a lot of story ahead of you, right? So it's kind of like Finding Nemo. I would say Pixar does the best job of telling stories. Like, if you want to just like get some relaxing downtime, watch Finding Nemo, because you can start to talk about a story the way that's designed. It's brilliant, right? And you can start to get some creative ideas about, wow, what could my story be? Like, what am I interested in? So I encourage people, find people who are doing really interesting jobs. Like, I'll be reaching out to you, Joseph, to hear all about how you do your podcast, because I think that's fantastic. And Paul, I'll be reaching out to you to find out how you wrote that first book. I mean, it's, find people who are doing things that you're interested in, and then start to paint the story of what that future is going to look like. I've worked with a lot of people who've transitioned from completely different industries. I've worked with NFL football players who transitioned from nothing but football since they were 4 years old into a whole career in finance, right? And we built these transferable skills, but we started that story because when they finished playing the game, now they have the next chapter, what it's going to be. Not every person in that field wants to become a coach or do something that's typically of sports. So you can get worked with another corporate lawyer, head of a legal counsel, who said, you know what, after 30 years, I want to write a fiction novel and I want to become an international consultant. And after 6 months of working together, that's what he did. But a lot of it became to starting to envision. You're not always going to know what that story looks like when you start to tell it, but get creative and start talking to people about it. And you'll be amazed. Synchronicity kicks in sometimes. You might run into an interesting person who kind of can help you craft that future story too.
That's great. I'm gonna move on to another question, if I may. Paula, in your advice on to somebody looking forward, but they don't know what they want to do necessarily, right? They've just gone through a shock. And how do people start to talk about how that direction? They don't know the answer yet, right? They just want to be employed and want to be happy and fulfilled. But how do they start to query? How do they start to themselves and others to really try to refine that path?
Ooh, yeah, we have to be practical about this, right? If you have bills that are rolling in, I mean, sometimes we do take jobs temporarily while you look for the next career opportunity, just to fill a financial gap. If you have your mortgage, your children, like there's some very real things that a paycheck helps us solve. So we can't sort of ignore that. But while that's occurring, while you're sort of in an interim opportunity, you should be doing some of the hard work that we mentioned earlier about kind of taking inventory of your skills and your abilities and what makes you uniquely you, and then tying that all together with your true purpose. What do you want to achieve out of whatever years are remaining in your career? What ties you together? What makes you get up in the morning? What makes you want to go to work? What makes you want to do the hard thing? Now, if it's just the paycheck, great, maximize that, find it, move on. But if there's something else that's more fulfilling, don't stop with the paycheck. Allow yourself the freedom to do that self-awareness and build that knowledge base. Again, we talked about an inventory of your moments of pride, an inventory of things that you've accomplished, big achievements, times when you were at your best. Asking those in your circle of trust of times when you saw me at my best. You'll start to really get that picture of who you are, and then how can you configure those skills aligned with your purpose in a way that can move you forward. Hopefully, in the meantime, you're doing that with a paycheck.
Yes. Joseph, anything you wanted to throw in there?
Well, I mean, just to kind of just to add on to that, I mean, all those points, Paul, make a lot of sense. The only thing I would add to that is if you're not exactly sure what you want to do next, I mean, this is quite a conundrum, right? Because you want to try to convey this confidence of what your future role is, but you might not know what that future role is. So my only additional suggestion is if you're still trying to kind of figure out what's next for you, you may have to just take your best guess and try to convey that to somebody else, because you basically have two options if you aren't sure what you want to do next. You can take a very open approach where you can go out to people and you can say, I'm open to roles A, B, C, and D. But what can happen is you can kind of fall through the cracks that way, because people don't exactly know what you're after, and you can come across as a bit unfocused. So what I would suggest is try to lead with focus but end with openness. So try to take your best guess. I'm targeting this role in this sector in this geography with these skills, but I'm also open to other opportunities that make use of my experiences and you name 2 or 3 of those experiences or skills. And I think if you take that approach, it may seem counterintuitive, but if you go in with some focus, it just helps people understand what to do with you, and you're also more likely to come to mind if and when those relevant opportunities come up.
I also think about, I'm in my late 50s, so I think about, I've worked for X number of decades, and I don't want to be a pack mule and get back on the trail necessarily. I have things I'd like to do, while I'm relatively young and healthy, and so this is an opportunity to not only reframe the job necessarily, but frankly your entire life, right? So it's not, in my personal experience, I cannot speak for the audience, but in my personal experience, I hang on to all the things I've accomplished, but now isn't there that opportunity really to carve out 20% of my life to go sailing, right? Or to whatever it is you want to do. So I think that sort of, I would think, Joseph, in particular, like that sort of helps guide your forwardness, right? Because I know I want to do 20% of my life sailing. Okay. So then I've got 80 over here.
Yeah.
So, so I wouldn't, to the audience, I would not dismiss the importance of your personal activities and happiness for the careerness, if you have the ability to not do that.
And John, if I may,
Yeah.
because it's relevant to what Joseph just shared and what you just shared, about carving out the portions of your life. A lot more people now have portfolio careers where they might be, quite advanced in one aspect of their career, but then they decide to start a side job or a side opportunity or do a little gigging for this. And then collectively it sort of creates this mosaic, if you will, of what their career is. But maybe different parts of their career, different career acts are at different stages. I've been a university professor for 30 years. I've kind of been there, done that. But I'm also really new at being the CEO of a tech company. Didn't expect that in my late 50s. But and it's okay to sort of be at these different levels at different times, and what portion of your, life you want to dedicate to each. And then the sailing, you got to add that, the parts that you want, or the time that you want for the things that you enjoy and the people you enjoy.
Yes, yes, great. So I have this sort of end cap question. I believe I do. If I have lots of paper, I'm showing my age. But just to the audience, I want to thank you for your participation. Thanks for those poll results. They were revealing to me. Again, we have a few more minutes. If you have questions, throw them in there. If you have things in the chat, there was a question earlier about resources. I think it was about setting up your own website was one question. I have some ideas on that personally, and I will share this chat in post with the panelists, and maybe they can opine, and I'm happy to give those answers over to the audience and to post them also on that landing page at Nova EDA. So here's my NCAP question, panel. If attendees remember just one storytelling tip or mindset shift from this conversation, what should it be? So let me go to Kathleen first, if I may.
Hey, one thing is always hard to narrow it down to one thing after all we've
I
talked
know,
about.
just get one, Kathleen.
Just one. Okay, then I have to say, own your own unique career story. You are unique. You are wonderful. I can't see you all right now, but know that we are with you, and just be beautifully you, and it may be a tough journey. Just don't do it alone.
Great. Joseph?
It's very similar, actually, just to embrace your unique path and invest time trying to connect the dots for yourself so that you can buy into the story that you're trying to sell to others. And this way you don't leave it up to others to deduce your story. You write it yourself, and then you state it confidently.
That's great. Paula, please.
Yeah, I'd say it's remember, it's your story. So you're the character, you create the plot, you have the arc, but more than anything, you can define the purpose and how the story will conclude.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. I'm going to remind the audience that we're going to go from strategic to sort of tactical next week. And that session will be on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And it's a workshop. So there'll be not a full panel, but there'll be a couple of folks, experts on resume writing I haven't finalized the panel, the group just yet. I might have a recruiter on there as well on the receiving end, but it's entitled Resume Overhaul, How to Sell Your Skills as You Pivot. So if you take this session, which is a more strategic and introspective one, it seems, and then you marry it to the next two, which are focused on your resume, tactically speaking, and LinkedIn the week after, your LinkedIn profile. And I've got a great person lined up for that one, and we'll add a couple more folks to that too. So closing words from me, we are with you. We get it. I've personally been through this, and we're very sympathetic. And please, even after this session, if you want to reach out, you can get a hold of me. The panelists have their contacts and their LinkedIn and in the invitation as well. So go ahead, and on their behalf, I'll say they'd love to hear from you. So I want to thank the panel, thank the audience very much, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.